if you're sending things into the slush pile, which is true. I've been in a lot of editors' offices, and they are floor-to-ceiling paper. The good news is that 99% of what is in a slush pile is in fact slush. So if you write coherently, then you have a much better chance than you probably think. But it will take an editor a long time to work his or her way down to wherever your novel is in the midst of all this stuff. No, really, I've seen some of the stuff in there. People will write up their grandmother's memoirs in a Day-Glo pen on a yellow pad and send it to a house that does cookbooks. Well, so anyway, therefore, if something comes in from a reputable agent, the editor will leap on it immediately because it's been pre-screened. They know that it's readable, it's literate, it's legible, and it might even be something they want. And they also know that the agent would be sending it to more than one editor, and therefore, if they want it, they better move quickly. So an agent can get you read much more quickly. Now, if the book does sell, an agent can negotiate a much better contract for you than you could do for yourself. And this is true too. Literary contracts are totally Byzantine. My first one ran 12 pages of clauses and subclauses and sub-subclauses. And it's only owing to the skill of my agent that I still own my t-shirt rights and my action figure rights. My husband says he can't wait to see the Blackjack Randall action figure.
Oh gosh. That would be funny.
So I said, well, this makes sense. How would I find an agent? And they began to give me advice. And I began to do my own research as well. And I was zeroing in on this one gentleman named Perry Knowlton, who was a literary agent who I thought might be a good match for me. He represented a lot of best-selling writers, which was good. I wanted someone who editors would pay attention to. And I had also heard that he wasn't afraid of long books or of unorthodox books, both of which it had struck me I had. And so I said, well, he seems like a good match, but I didn't know how to get at him because he didn't take unsolicited queries. And so I thought, well, you're not finished writing the book, go on asking questions. Either you'll figure out how to get at him or you'll find someone else who's easier. And so I did. Well, one day, a few months later, I was talking to a friend of mine named John Stiff, who writes science fiction mysteries. And I said, I'm asking everyone about agents. John, do you have one? He said, well, yeah. He said, by coincidence, it's the same as so-and-so. His name is Perry Knowlton. He said, I know you're about ready to look for your own agent. Would you like me to introduce you to him? I said, well, yes, John, that would be nice. Well, I was afraid that John would leave CompuServe or be run over by a bus or something before I finished the book. So I said, yes, go ahead, ask him. So John just wrote a ordinary note, with a typewriter and paper, and sent it to Perry saying I was worth looking at. Well, Perry was a very charming older gentleman, no longer with us, alas, who I'm sure never even looked at a computer in his life, let alone touched one. So this was a very archaic sort of introduction. But I followed that with my own query letter, and I said, Dear Mr. Knowlton, I've been writing and selling nonfiction by myself for some years now. But now that I'm writing fiction, I understand that I really need good literary representation, and you've been recommended to me by John and Judy and all these people whose opinions I respect. I said, I have this very long historical novel. I don't want to waste your time. Would you be willing to read excerpts from it? I didn't tell him I wasn't through writing an excerpt from it. Anyway, he very kindly called back and said, yes, he'd read my excerpts. So I hastily wrote a 26-page single-spaced synopsis and sent it with my bundle of excerpts. And he took me on the basis of an unfinished first novel, which is not at all usual now, and it wasn't usual then, but very lucky for me. Well, 6 months later, I finally finished the book, and I sent it to Perry. I called to tell him the manuscript was coming, and also to say that I would be in New York myself the next week for a scientific conference. And he said, oh, that's great, come up to the office and we can meet, because we'd done all our business over the phone to this point. Well, so the next week I go up to his office in some trepidation of mind, because at this point, he's the only person in the world who has read the whole book, and I don't yet know what he thinks about it. So he met me, and as I say, turned out to be a charming older gentleman, who took me back to his office, got me a Diet Coke, and was chatting away, trying to put me at my ease. His conversation didn't have quite the expected effect, though, because it was at this point that I discovered that in addition to my CompuServe friends, he also represented Tony Hillerman, Frederick Forsyth, and Robertson Davies, and the estate of Ayn Rand. And I was sitting there thinking, if you have the nerve to call Robertson Davies, Robbie, you're a better man than I am. What was most unnerving, though, was that he had my manuscript on his desk in front of him in the giant orange box in which I shipped it. And I was sure that at some point he was going to say, well, now that I've read the whole thing, it's just too weird. There's nothing I can do with it. But keep me in mind. And I was expecting to hear this at any moment. Instead, he said, oh, the thing about Freddie Forsyth and Robbie Davies and those guys is that they're all great storytellers. And then he laid a hand on the box and smiled at me and said, and you're another one. Well, I was so gratified at this point, I didn't care what he did with the book. But I did gather my wits enough to ask. And he said, oh, I'm sending it out today to 5 5 editors who I think might like it. And he explained who they all were and ran down their characteristics and why he thought they might like it, who was the best bet and all that. And I said, well, that's great, how long do you think we might have to wait for an answer? Because I'd been reading Writer's Market, which says, a year, 2 years, whatever. And he said, oh, I've told them I want an answer in 30 days. Pick the right agent. So I went home to wait for 30 days. Well, instead, 4 days later, I get a message on my answering machine that says, this is Perry, I've just called to update you on your manuscript. I said, well, the ones he sent it to, at least one of them was said, here, I'm not reading a 10-pound book, take it back. So I called up expecting to hear that. Instead, he said, well, of the 5 I sent it to, so far 3 of them have called back with offers to buy. So he was able to negotiate amongst them for 2 weeks, emerged with a 3-book contract, and bing, I was a novelist.
Yay for us.
Well, I thought if you would like, I would read you a very short bit from An Echo in the Bone, just so you could say you've had a genuine literary experience here. And then if you like, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about me, the writing, the books, movies, who I would cast as Jamie, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, this is a fairly short bit. It's only about 3 minutes. And it's from an early part of the book. It does not contain any spoilers for those of you who have not read Echo in the Bone yet. Yeah, don't worry about that. Thank you. Sure thing. Now this takes place in the early part of the book while the Frasers are still on Fraser's Ridge in North Carolina. You recall we left them at the end of A Breath of Snow and Ashes, declaring that they were going to Scotland to get Jamie's printing press. Well, they're still intending to go, but they can't go in the winter because the mountain passes are choked with snow. They have to wait for spring. Well, now spring has sprung and the water is running down the creeks, and Claire is wading up the creek picking watercress because it's been a long winter with no greenery, and she's dying for salad. So while she's doing this, she hears screeching and yelling coming from up the creek, and going to investigate this noise, she discovers the gentlemen of the household taking their spring bath. And so she pauses to enjoy the spectacle for a while, and then seeing Jamie get out and wrap himself in his plaid and head off uphill, she goes to leave her basket and follows him. I waved briefly and turned up the side trail that led to the upper clearing. New house, everyone called it, though the only indications that there might someday be a house there were a stack of felled logs and a number of pegs driven into the ground with strings tied between them. These were meant to mark the placement and dimensions of the house Jamie intended to build in replacement of the big house when we came back. He'd been moving the pegs, I saw. The wide front room was now wider. The back room, intended for my surgery, had developed a growth of some sort, perhaps a separate still room. The architect was sitting on a log, surveying his kingdom, stark naked. Expecting me, were you? I asked, taking off my shawl and hanging it on a convenient branch. I was. He smiled and scratched his chest. I thought the sight of my naked backside would likely inflame you. Or was it maybe Bobby's? Bobby hasn't got one. Do you know you haven't got a single grey hair below the neck? Why is that, I wonder? He glanced down, inspecting himself, but it was true. There were only a few strands of silver among the fiery mass of his hair, though his beard, from the winter growth tediously and painfully removed a few days before, was heavily frosted with white. But the hair on his chest was still a dark auburn, and that below a fluffy mass of vivid ginger. He combed his fingers thoughtfully through the exuberant foliage, looking down. I think it's hiding, he remarked. He glanced up at me, one eyebrow raised. Want to come and help me hunt for it? I came round in front of him and obligingly knelt